Today we're going to look at lesson 9.4, which is factoring trinomials in the form you see there, ax squared plus bx plus c. So these are general trinomials. They're not perfect square trinomials. They're not difference of squares. So we're going to look at these three multiplication problems, and then we're going to try to answer these several questions to help us understand and realize how to factor these. So this first one, notice we have 2x times x. Well, that's 2x squared. 2x times 3 is 6x. And 5 times x gives me the 5x, and 5 times 3 gives me the 15. Noticing we have like terms here, we get 11x. So our answer is 2x squared plus 11x plus 15. Multiplying these, that would be 12x squared minus 15x plus 16x minus 20. Again, adding these middle terms, which are like terms, negative 15x and positive 16x, gets us to our answer of 12x squared plus x minus 20. The last one here, x times x is x squared. X times negative 2 is negative 2x. Negative 6x times x is negative 6. And negative 6 times a negative 2, that's a negative times a negative, so that's positive 12. And adding like terms, we get negative 8x. So coming down to these questions, where does the first term of the trinomial come from? So we're looking at the first term, the 2x squared, the 12x squared, and the x squared. Where did we get that? Well, that came from our original. That came from the first one, 2x times x. The second one, 3x times 4x. And the third one, x times x. So to answer the question, it came from multiplying the first terms of each binomial. All right, next question. From where does the last term of the trinomial come? So we're looking at the last term now. We're looking at the 15, the negative 20, and the positive 12. Well, the 15 came from the 5 times the 3. The negative 20 came from 4 times negative 5. And the positive 12 came from a negative 6 times a negative 2. So to put that into words, to answer that, that's multiplying the second term of each binomial. And the middle term, that one's a little different. So we're looking at, where did this middle term come from? The middle term didn't just come from one multiplication, it came from two. So notice here our 11x, well, that came from 6x plus 5x. And that 6x plus 5x came from 2x times 3, and then 5 times x. And you'll notice it's the same for these other ones. This x came from the sum of those two, and those two came from the product of 3x times 5 and 4 times 4x. And the last one, you'll see the same thing again. This negative 8x, the middle term, came from the sum of those two. Well, those two terms came from x times negative 2 and negative 6 times x. So in short, that middle term came from the sum of the products of the other parts. So the ones, if you look up, that are shown here, here, and here. A couple other questions to think about. If the sign of the last term is positive, what are the possible signs of the binomial factors? So we're going to end up having to go in this direction. We're going to start with something like this and end with something like this. Let's look at the next question here. If the sign of the last term is positive, what are the possible signs of the binomial factors? We're going to be factoring, so we're going to be starting with this, and we're going to factor into this. So we're looking for what are the possible signs of the binomial factors when there's a positive at the end. Well, here's a positive, and the first one gave us a positive answer. What are our signs up here and up here? Well, in the first one, we'll start with the first one with a 15. We had a positive 5 times a positive 3 gave us a positive 15. So we can have a positive times a positive gives us this positive 15. Or looking at this last example, we actually had a negative 6 times a negative 2, which in turn gave us a positive 12. So we could have two negatives. So a positive and a positive, or a negative and a negative. Next question, if the sign of the last term is negative, we only have one example of that, negative 20 here in the middle. The last term is negative. What are the possible signs of the binomial factors? Well, in this case here, we have a positive and a negative, which makes sense. A positive times a negative is negative. We also could have had a negative times a positive, would have also given us a negative on our last term. Essentially, those two things are the same. You can have a positive and negative, or negative and positive, but they really mean the same thing. So that's our investigation. Knowing those different facts will help us factor. Now, factoring ones like these ends up being some guess and check. The more practice you have at them, the better you'll get and the quicker you'll get with them. So let's go ahead and look at this one in the box here. Factor 5x squared plus 13x minus 6. The first thing we always want to do is check for a common monomial factor. We have a 5x squared, a 13x, and a negative 6. There are no common factors there, so we can't factor out a common monomial factor. So now what we do is I'm going to go ahead and put parentheses here, and I'm going to do a few of them, because we could have a few different possibilities. How do we get this 5x squared? Where would that come from? Well, that's the first question we had there, by multiplying the first terms of each binomial. So what two things can we multiply by to get a 5x squared? Well, we can have a 5x times an x, or we could have an x times a 5x, but order doesn't matter here. So the only way to get a 5x squared is a 5x times an x. Next, we're going to look at the last one to get a negative 6. To get a negative 6, we have several different options, but we want a negative. So in order to get a negative, we have to have one thing to be positive and one to be negative. We might have to switch those two around later. But our options to get 6, well, we can have a 1 times a 6. Coming down to this one, we would have to have our 5x and x. And we could have a 2 and a 3. I'll make a positive 2 and a positive 3. Another one, we could have 5x and x, and we could have positive 6 and negative 1. (5x times x will give us our 5x squared. Another option might be positive 3 and a negative 2. There's even more possibilities. We could have these 4 possibilities that we have, and we could switch the signs. We might need to put the negative first and the positive second. So we have several different possibilities. We want to find the right one. And I know to start with, this seems like it might be a long amount of work, but again, the more that you do these, the better you'll get at them. So let's check a few of these. Putting a 5x and an x guarantees I'll get the 5x squared. Putting a 1 and a negative 6 guarantees I'll get the negative 6x. What the one in question here is the 13x. So we'll multiply these to check. So we multiply the 5x times negative 6, which is negative 30x, and then the 1 times x, which is x. Will those give me a positive 13x? Definitely not. They give me a negative 29x. So this one does not work. Let's try the next one. The 5x times the x definitely gives me the 5x squared. The 2 and the negative 3 will multiply to give me negative 6. I need to check the 13x. So we do the 5x times negative 3 is negative 15x, and 2 times x, which is 2x. Combining those gives me negative 13x, which seems nice, but I want a positive 13x. So here's something we can learn right now. If we ever get the opposite of what we want, we got a negative 13x with this. In order to get the positive 13x, we're going to switch these signs. We're going to switch our positive and our negative sign, and that should give us the 13x. So we won't need these other two guesses here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite our guess, but we're going to switch the sign. So we're going to do 5x minus 2 times x plus 3. Let's check this. The 5x times x gives me the 5x squared. The negative 2 times the 3 definitely gives me the negative 6x. I want to check these two. So 5x times 3 is 15x. And then negative 2 times x is minus 2x. They do combine to give me the 13x. So here is the factored form of 5x squared plus 13x minus 6. So it takes some guess and check, but once you get good at it, it will go fairly quickly. We see here just some strategies. First thing we should do, of course, is factor out any common monomial factors. We could put next in here, determine if it's perfect square trinomial or a difference of squares, which we did in the past few lessons. Next, it says find the possible factors of A and the possible factors of C. So A is the coefficient of the x squared, C is the constant. And then use guess and check with the different combinations of the possible factors to try to find the correct factors. Check the results by multiplying the factors. So first thing we're going to do is we want to see if there's any common factors. 18, 33, and 21. 3 goes into each of those, so we can factor this to 6x squared minus 11x minus 7. And we're going to see if we can factor this remaining trinomial. So we're going to have a lot of guess and checks. I'm not going to write a whole list of them. I'll just write one, check it, and then see if it works. If not, we can try something different. So here we have our 3 still. We're going to put 2 sets of parentheses. And our possibilities to get 6x squared. We can have a 6x and a 1x. Actually, total lie. I'm going to put the other possibility here. The other possibilities of getting a 6x is 3x and 2x. Then I want to try to get a negative 7. The only possibilities for negative 7 is having a 7 and a 1, and one of them being negative and one of them being positive. So I'll just start off with a negative 1 and a positive 7. And I'll do the same thing down here. And let's try to see if this works. By choosing the 6x and the x, I guaranteed that I'll have a 6x squared. And by choosing the negative 1 and the 7, I guarantee that I have a negative 7. The part in question is the negative 11x. So once again, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply the 6x times the 7, which already puts me way up at 42x. And then negative 1 times x is negative x, which combines to be 41x, which is not close to my 11. So this is not an option. So even switching the signs wouldn't work. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try switching the 7 and the 1. So we'll put our 7 here and our 1 here. And now we're going to try. I already know I'll get the 6x squared and the negative 7, so let's try. We got 6x times 1 is 6x, and negative 7 times x is negative 7x, which does not give us it gives us negative 1x, which is not negative 11x. So this option here isn't going to work using the 6x and the x. So let's come and try our other option. All right, so we still have our 3 on the outside. We know that 3x times 2x will give the 6x squared. We know the negative 1 and the 7 will give the negative 7, so we have to check for the negative 11. So what we do is we multiply 3x times 7, which is 21x, and negative 1 times 2x, which is negative 2x, which gives us 19x, which is not negative 11x. So let's try switching 1 and 7. So we'll put 7 here and 1 over here. Again, the 3x, or the 6x squared and the negative 7 we already know will work. We need to check these two, so that's 3x, and this is negative 14x, which gives us negative 11x, and that is what we wanted. So this solution is correct, so let's just rewrite it. Our answer is 3 times 3x minus 7 times 2x plus 1. If we multiplied that back out, we would get our original right here.